These photographs were taken in the 19th century. They are not illustrations. They are not reconstructions. They are not artistic impressions. They are photographs. And yet, the cities they show do not look new. Streets appear fully formed. Buildings stand complete and uniform. Infrastructure looks settled, not emerging. According to history, many of these cities were still developing when these images were captured. Some were considered young. Others were said to be expanding rapidly, but the photographs tell a different story. There is no visible transition, no half-built districts, no clear signs of early growth. Instead, what we see are cities that appear finished, almost timeless. And once you notice this, the question becomes difficult to ignore. If these photographs show cities at the beginning of modern history, why do they already look like the end result? Photographs do something unique. They record reality at a specific moment in time. Unlike written accounts, photographs do not explain. They do not justify. They do not speculate. They simply show what was there. This makes them especially valuable when examining history. Written records can reflect intention. They can emphasize progress. They can compress timelines. Photographs cannot. They capture the physical condition of the world as it existed in front of the lens. In the 19th century, photography was expensive and deliberate. Shots were composed carefully. Exposure times were long. Subjects were chosen intentionally. Photographers did not waste plates on scenes without significance. Which makes the content of many early urban photographs especially striking. They show completed streets, finished buildings, mature city layouts, not experiments, not temporary structures, not improvisations. These images often represent the earliest visual records of these cities. There is no earlier photographic layer beneath them, which means what we are seeing is not the result of long photographic documentation. It is the starting point. Another important detail is consistency. Photographs from different cities, taken by different photographers, show similar conditions. Large stone buildings, wide streets, coherent urban design. This repetition suggests that these images are not anomalies. They represent a norm. The photographs do not tell us how these cities came to look this way. They simply show that by the time the camera arrived, the cities were already there, fully formed. And that raises a critical question. If photography arrived at the start of modern history, why does it seem to document cities that already belong to a much older world? Once we accept photographs as neutral witnesses, another inconsistency comes into focus: completeness. Many 19th century city photographs show urban environments that appear fully realized. From edge to edge, streets are paved, curbs are set, drainage channels are in place, buildings align cleanly along uniform street grids, facades follow consistent heights and proportions, corners meet at precise angles. This is not what early-stage cities usually look like. Growing cities tend to reveal their process. Temporary structures appear, mixed materials coexist, construction scars remain visible. But in these photographs, the city looks settled, finished. In some images, entire districts stretch into the distance with no visible interruption, no scaffolding, no partially built structures, no transitional zones. This raises a simple but powerful question. Where is the construction phase? If these cities were actively expanding, we would expect to see signs of that expansion. Work sites, incomplete buildings, temporary infrastructure. Instead, we see coherence. Sidewalks connect seamlessly. Street widths remain consistent across long stretches. Public buildings integrate smoothly with residential blocks. This suggests planning executed to completion, not incremental growth. Another detail reinforces this impression. Urban amenities appear fully functional. Street lighting poles stand in regular intervals. Bridges align with roadways without improvisation. Public squares are framed by finished architecture. These are not provisional features. They imply long-term use. In many cases, the photographs represent the earliest visual records of these locations. There is no earlier photographic evidence showing a rougher or more primitive stage. The city enters the photographic record already complete. This does not mean that construction did not occur. It means that when the camera arrived, the process was already over. And that timing matters. If photography arrived during the period we associate with urban formation, then why does it document the end state rather than the transition? Another pattern becomes visible when comparing multiple cities. Despite differences in geography and culture, early photographs show similar levels of completeness: wide streets, monumental buildings, uniform materials. This consistency suggests that what we are seeing is not a unique moment, but a widespread condition. The cities do not look experimental, they look established. They do not look like places in the middle of becoming. They look like places that have already become. At this point, the question is no longer about architectural style or historical explanation. It is about sequence. Did these cities reach completion faster than we assume, or did photography arrive after a phase of development that is no longer visible? The photographs do not answer this directly, but they do something just as important. They show us that the cities of the 19th century appear to enter modern history already formed, with little visual evidence of how they got there. Once the completeness of these cities becomes apparent, another detail stands out: silence. Many early city photographs appear strangely empty. Wide streets stretch into the distance, with no pedestrians. Public squares stand open without crowds. Entire neighborhoods seem still. This absence is difficult to ignore. Cities are, by definition, places of movement, markets, traffic, daily life. Yet in these images, the city feels paused. The official explanation focuses on photography itself. Early cameras required long exposure times. Moving subjects did not register clearly. People and animals simply vanished from the final image. This explanation is valid, but incomplete. Long exposures explain blurred figures. They explain faint shadows. They do not explain total absence. In many photographs, even stationary objects associated with human activity are missing. No carts left along the streets, no market stalls, no groups gathered in public spaces. In some images, isolated figures do appear, standing still long enough to be captured, which raises an important question. If people were present, why are they so few? Another factor is timing. Photographers often chose moments carefully. Early morning, controlled environments, minimal motion. But cities do not empty completely, even briefly, especially not across entire districts. The emptiness feels systematic. Street after street shows the same stillness. Plaza after plaza remains unoccupied. This pattern repeats across different cities and different photographers, which suggests that we are not simply seeing coincidence. The photographs do not show chaos or disruption. They show order. A city prepared, but not yet inhabited. This creates an unsettling contrast. Infrastructure without crowds, buildings without occupants, urban scale without urban life. The images feel less like snapshots of daily activity and more like documentation of readiness, as if the city exists in anticipation of use. This does not mean the cities were abandoned. It does not mean they were uninhabited. It means that the photographs capture a moment where human presence is strangely minimal relative to the scale of construction. And when that imbalance appears repeatedly, it deserves attention. The absence of people shifts the focus. Instead of asking who lived here, we begin asking when. Were these photographs taken during transitions, between phases of occupation, after construction, but before population growth? Or Do they reflect a deeper mismatch between the age of the city and the moment it entered photographic history? The images do not provide answers. They provide contrast, a contrast that becomes harder to ignore the longer we look. When human presence fades into the background, attention shifts naturally to the buildings themselves, and the buildings tell a quieter story. In many early photographs, architecture does not look new. Stone surfaces appear worn, edges are softened, details show signs of long exposure to weather. This kind of aging does not happen overnight. Weathering leaves patterns, water stains follow gravity, stone erodes unevenly over time. These marks accumulate slowly. Yet, in photographs dated close to the supposed construction period, these signs are already present. Columns show rounding at the base. Steps appear polished by repeated use. Masonry joints look settled rather than fresh. Fresh construction usually looks sharp. Edges are crisp. Surfaces are clean. Tool marks remain visible. But what we often see instead is maturity. Another signal lies in alignment. In some images, buildings display subtle irregularities, slight shifts, gentle sagging, minor asymmetries. These are not flaws of construction. They are the result of time. Materials settle, foundations adjust, structures respond to gravity and weather. This process takes decades, and yet these effects appear in images that represent the earliest photographic record of the city. Another detail reinforces this impression. Repairs are visible. Patches of stone differ slightly in color or texture. Sections of masonry appear replaced or reinforced. Repairs imply prior use. They suggest that maintenance had already begun. Maintenance does not occur on buildings that have just been completed. It occurs on buildings that have been in service. Even surface finishes tell a story. Plaster appears dulled. Paint shows variation. Metal elements show oxidation. And these are not dramatic signs of ruin. They are subtle indicators of age. Taken individually, each could be dismissed. But together, they form a pattern. The architecture in these photographs behaves like architecture that has lived through time, not architecture that has just entered it. This does not mean that construction dates are wrong. It means that the relationship between construction and photographic documentation may be more complex than we assume. Perhaps these buildings were completed earlier than recorded. Perhaps they were modified versions of older structures. Perhaps photography arrived later than we think, relative to the life of the city. The images do not tell us which interpretation is correct, but they do tell us that the buildings themselves do not look young. They carry the visual language of endurance, and that creates tension. Because when the earliest images already show age, it becomes difficult to locate the true beginning. At this point, the question shifts again. If the architecture already appears mature when photography begins, what stage of urban history are we actually seeing? By the time these photographs were taken, photography itself was still a young technology. Cameras were large, exposure times were long. The process required patience, precision, and technical knowledge. Photography did not spread instantly. It arrived slowly, city by city. Only certain places were photographed early. And yet, when photography arrived, it did not capture cities in transition. It captured cities already complete. This creates a technological mismatch. The technology used to record these images was fragile and limited. The environments it recorded appear robust, complex, and fully operational. Consider the contrast. Photography in the mid-19th century struggled with motion. Buildings in the photographs display advanced structural stability. Photographers needed stillness. The cities in the images appear frozen, not because they were inactive, but because the architecture dominated the frame. Another contradiction lies in infrastructure. In many photographs, we see elements that require long-term planning. Drainage systems integrated into streets, bridges aligned precisely with road networks, large public buildings positioned within coherent urban layouts. These features are not spontaneous. They require surveying, coordination, execution over extended periods. Yet, the photographs often represent the first moment these cities enter visual history. This suggests that the development phase occurred before documentation. Another layer of tension appears when we consider access. Photography arrived through trade routes, scientific societies, and professional networks. It followed established infrastructure, which means that by the time a city could be photographed, it already supported travel, communication, and technical exchange. In other words, photography did not create visibility, it followed it. This reframes how we interpret the images. We are not seeing the beginning of urban life, we are seeing the moment when cities became visible to modern documentation. That moment may not align with their actual age. The technology that captured the image may have arrived after the environment it recorded had already matured. This would explain why photographs show advanced infrastructure but lack visual records of early construction. The city existed before the camera. Another subtle detail reinforces this. Photographs often emphasize monumental architecture rather than construction sites. Photographers chose what already impressed. They documented what looked established, not what looked temporary. This selection bias does not falsify the images, it clarifies their context. The camera did not witness birth. It witnessed presence, and presence implies prior development. At this point, the question is no longer about what photography can show, it is about what it cannot. Photography records surfaces, not timelines. It captures what stands, not how long it took to stand there. Which means that when photographs show cities that appear older than their recorded history, the discrepancy may lie not in the image, but in our assumptions about sequence. The technological context does not disprove official timelines, but it complicates them. It reminds us that documentation and development do not always arrive together, and that realization prepares us for the next step. Because if this pattern appears once, it can be dismissed. But if it appears repeatedly, across archives and continents, it begins to suggest something larger. When a single photograph feels unusual, it can be dismissed. But when the same visual contradictions appear again and again across different archives, something changes. The pattern repeats. In Europe, early photographs show capital cities with fully formed boulevards, monumental buildings, and integrated infrastructure. Already present at the moment photography begins. In North America, images from the mid to late 19th century depict cities that appear settled and mature despite being described as young or rapidly developing in written histories. In Eastern Europe and Russia, photographs reveal vast urban spaces, heavy masonry construction, and coherent city layouts, often with minimal visible population. Different photographers, different locations, different decades, yet the visual language is remarkably consistent. The same absence of transition, the same sense of completion, the same architectural maturity. This repetition matters. Archives are independent. Photographers did not coordinate across borders. Collections were assembled separately, and yet the images tell similar stories. Cities appear to enter photographic history already complete. Another detail strengthens this observation. Within the same archive, photographs taken years apart often show little change in the core urban fabric. Streets remain aligned, buildings remain dominant, infrastructure remains fixed. Growth appears to happen at the edges, not at the center. This suggests that what we are seeing is not rapid construction captured by chance, but stable environments documented after they were already established. The repetition also crosses architectural styles: classical, baroque, neoclassical, industrial. Despite stylistic differences, the underlying urban logic remains the same. Large-scale planning, integrated systems, finished public spaces. If these images represented anomalies, we would expect variation. Incomplete districts, chaotic growth, uneven development. Instead, we see coherence, and coherence across independent records suggests structure rather than coincidence. This does not require a single explanation. It does not require a single cause. It requires acknowledgement that the visual record behaves consistently in ways that challenge simplified timelines. Photography did not selectively arrive only after cities were finished. It arrived where conditions allowed. And where it arrived, the cities already stood. The repeating pattern across archives does not prove an alternative history, but it does reveal a gap between the moment cities became visible to documentation and the moment they came into being. That gap is not filled by images, it is filled by assumption. And assumptions are precisely what these photographs quietly invite us to question. At this point, the evidence is no longer isolated. It is cumulative, and cumulative patterns deserve careful attention. Because when the same visual story emerges from independent sources across geography and time, it suggests that the story itself is larger than any single explanation. At this point, the photographs leave us with possibilities rather than conclusions, and that distinction matters. Photographs do not explain history, they only show us what existed at a specific moment. What they consistently show is this: cities appear complete the moment they enter the visual record. There are several ways to interpret this. Some researchers suggest that photography arrived late relative to urban development. By the time cameras became available, many cities had already passed their formative stages. In this view, the absence of construction phases in photographs is not evidence of anything hidden, only of timing. Others argue that written histories tend to compress development into simplified narratives. Decades of preparation, surveying, and incremental building may be summarized into a few lines. The camera, however, does not compress time. It captures the end state. There is also the possibility that cities inherited more than we acknowledge. Urban environments rarely start from nothing. They build upon roads, foundations, and systems that already exist. If 19th-century cities expanded over earlier frameworks, the appearance of maturity becomes easier to understand. Not mysterious, but overlooked. What makes the photographs compelling is not what they prove, but what they complicate. They challenge the assumption that cities always grow visibly, gradually, and under observation. They remind us that documentation follows access, not origin. The camera did not arrive at the beginning. It arrived when the city was already there. This does not require alternative civilizations. It does not require forgotten technologies. It requires caution about assuming that what we can see represents the full story. History often relies on what survives in records. Photographs rely on what stood long enough to be captured. Between those 2 points lies a gap where preparation, transition, and inheritance can disappear. The photographs do not tell us who built these cities first. They do not tell us how long they existed before being documented. They simply show us that when modern history begins, visually, the world already looks old. And that observation alone is worth holding on to, because once you recognize it, you begin to notice similar patterns elsewhere. In infrastructure, in architecture, in the way cities layer themselves over time. This series is not about replacing one explanation with another. It is about learning to look more carefully, to question sequences rather than deny outcomes. If this exploration has changed the way you view historical photographs, then it has served its purpose. In future episodes, we will continue examining visual evidence, maps, construction images, early film, not to claim certainty, but to better understand how much of the past existed before it was ever recorded. Stay observant. Stay patient. Sometimes history does not hide itself. It simply waits to be noticed.